thanks to the Michigan Soybean Committee for supporting this video. Hey there! If you live anywhere in the Midwest United States, you've probably seen this. It's a field of soybeans during harvest season. So what's the story? This equipment runs on a biofuel made with soybeans. Turns out, soybeans can be used to replace petroleum. In fact, if you have a diesel truck, this stuff is probably already in your fuel tank. But I wanted to know why this works. I'm not super into engines, but it really seems like you shouldn't be able to take just anything, throw it in your fuel tank, and have your vehicle run properly. So how do you turn soybeans into something that can power a truck? To find out, I got to spend a week traveling around Southeast Michigan, talking with experts and going behind the scenes at the places where the magic happens. And it has completely changed the way I think about soybeans. Like many good stories these days, this one starts with an unexpected email. A while back, I got an email from a soybean farmer from Arkansas named Robert. And in his email, Robert said that for almost every product that contains a little bit of petroleum, so a non-renewable fossil fuel, we can now replace that petroleum with soybean oil, including in diesel. It's called soybean biodiesel. And that caught my attention because compared to cars, it's been really difficult to find ways to run big diesel-powered trucks and ships on renewable energy. Right now, these vehicles can carry tons of cargo for huge distances without having to refuel, and that's hard to replicate with our current batteries. But then, here was Robert telling me that we could swap some of that petroleum diesel for a fuel made of one of the most common crops in the United States. If true, that would mean less local pollution from fossil fuels, which has been linked to conditions like asthma and cancer. It would also mean taking another step to address global climate change. Transportation definitely isn't the only contributor to that, but it is a piece of the pie. Still, if I've learned anything in my time as a science writer, it's that solutions like this are rarely black and white. So I had 4 questions here. 1, what's growing soybeans like in the first place? Because if it's a super fuel-intensive process that really taxes the soil, maybe that outweighs the benefits of biodiesel. Question 2, how do you turn soybean oil into a viable fuel? And also, is that fuel any good compared to petroleum diesel? And finally, does using soybeans for fuel mean there's less food to go around? Because soybeans are a major food source for both people and animals. To learn more about all of this, I had Robert from Arkansas connect me with folks a little closer to home at the Michigan Soybean Committee. They invest in resources and research for Michigan soybean farmers, and they helped me get connected with experts who could teach me more. And that's how I found myself 400 miles from home in a town I'd never heard of called Melvin, Michigan. There, I got to talk to farmer Rob Steenbergh, and I think farmers are my new heroes.
So I just kind of want to chat about like what you do, what it takes to grow this many dang soybeans.
Well, we're a small farmer. We farm about 500 acres, or 800 acres. We own about 500. We grow soybeans, wheat, corn, and dry edible beans. Other than that.
And how long have you been doing this?
My dad started this farm with the 40 acres right here back in the 40s. I think it was 46 or 48. And then my brother and I farmed together. I've been doing it since about 1989 or 86 or 89.
I guess with soybeans in particular. So I'm a brand new like hobby gardener. So I've got my little tomatoes and my little peppers, but I know nothing about growing soybeans.
Okay.
So can you kind of like walk me through how do you do this?
Well, it starts sometimes as much as 2 or 3 years. Your rotation's important, so you're not going the same crop year after year.
Okay.
Corn after beans. Sometimes it'll be wheat after beans. Sometimes it will be 2 years beans. And then of course we plant in the spring and hopefully harvest in the fall.
Yeah.
And we have a good growing season.
Cool. Neat. So when you're rotating the crops, that's preventing like soil depletion, right? Of certain
It's preventing like diseases that could get in the beans. Like this year in particular, we no-till a fair amount, so we don't have a big issue with white mold. But if you grow beans on beans on beans on beans, then you can have more of an issue with the white mold. Also other diseases too.
Cool, that makes sense.
These soybean plant, what's really interesting about a soybean plant, and I can't go through the complete thing, but I'll pull one up.
Oh, hello.
A soybean is a legume. So a soybean will fixate its own nitrogen. It will pull nitrogen out of the air and convert it, but each one of these little nodules are nitrogen. And if you want to know if they're healthy, you squeeze them and they should be pink in the middle. And this right here is plant. I mean, I didn't pull the whole roots up, but as you can see, there's quite a few nodules on it.
Yeah.
So they produce their own nitrogen.
Neat. Do they make or do they fix more nitrogen than they'll use in a season?
Most of the time, yeah. You will get a little bit of benefit for the following crop for your end, but not a lot. But they all have characteristics when they breed them. And if you can see, I don't have my glasses on. See these little hairs?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Little fuzzy guys.
What color is that? Is it gray or brown?
I would call that brown. Yeah, I'm going to call it brown.
That might be a brown pubescence. And you can tell this by these little hairs when these little beans come right out of the ground. So you can actually go in here, like if I didn't know, I knew these were a certain company's beans, but I'm unsure what variety they are per se, then I can go in and pull this plant and look at the specs on it and say, okay, this has got a purple flower, it's got a tan pubescence or a gray pubescence or a light tawny. I guess tawny is the word. So I thought that's rather interesting.
Yeah, I think
don't
that's
know that
neat.
about soybeans.
No, I thought soybeans were soybeans. I didn't realize there was so much variety.
What really struck me about Rob is just how deeply knowledgeable, straightforward, and also how humble he is. After this, he also gave me a tour of some of the equipment he uses, and while I was in awe, he talked about this like it was no big deal.
That thing does not mess around. That's huge.
Nah, it's small. I don't know if you're going very many other places, but you'll see with some of this equipment.
You can tell I grew up in the suburbs and I now live in the UP, and all we have
Oh, you're a Uper.
Yeah. All we have are forests where I live. We don't have combines driving around. Yeah, I know this is like your normal everyday day, but I still think this is really cool.
Like I said, we just take this stuff for granted. So
Yeah, sure.
People like yourself, or a lot of people, I mean, it's like people don't know where their food comes from.
No.
In any case, I heard he'd been running his equipment on biodiesel for forever, and I really wanted to pick his brain about what that experience has been like. Because if there was some drawback to it, like it was super expensive or the fuel economy was worse, he seemed like the kind of guy who would just straight up tell me that. But first, I wanted to get some context on where that biodiesel actually comes from. So I headed down to Adrian to meet up with Jennifer Weaver. She's a liaison between auto engine manufacturers and the clean fuels industry, and knows a thing or two about soybean biodiesel.
Okay, so you said you've been in this field for about 20 years.
Yeah.
How old is the biodiesel industry?
Just a little bit older than that. Actually,
Okay.
It's been about 30 years in the making, and it was actually formed when soybean farmers had an excess of soybean oil on their hands, and they were trying to figure out a market application for that. And the biodiesel industry was basically created by soybean farmers who were looking for additional markets. Let me preface this by saying biodiesel can be made from a number of different feedstocks. About 50% of the biodiesel in the United States is made from soybeans. It can also be made from other vegetable oils. It can be made from animal fat. Used cooking oil is a growing feedstock in the United States. So whatever process, whatever feedstock you use to make biodiesel, at the end of the production process, it still has to meet those really rigid ASTM specifications that I mentioned. So we are a truly diverse feedstock type of industry. It allows us to make good use of waste products that are more prevalent in some parts of the country than others. Michigan grows an awful lot of soybeans, and so that and other Midwestern states, soybean oil makes an excellent product. So this little bean here, when you crush it, about 80% of that bean remains protein meal. About 20% of it is kind of squeezed out as oil. So that 80% protein meal is going to feed humans and animals. The more soybeans we grow, the more protein meal we have, the more people and animals we can feed, and consequently, the more soybean oil is left over. So we can use that 20%, or a portion actually of that 20% oil content, to turn it into biodiesel. we're bringing actually the price of that food and feed down for humans and animals.
Yeah.
Because we're just kind of coming along for a ride. We're producing more to feed the world, and we can't possibly ingest all of the fats and oils that come out of that production. We're just using that excess byproduct to make a fuel.
But again, you can't just throw straight soybean oil into your truck or tractor and expect it to run without problems. Studies have confirmed that. So to learn what happens next, I turned to Keiven Brackelman. He's the plant manager at W2 Fuels, where they turn soybean oil into biodiesel. And he graciously took me into the plant to show me how it's made. Side note, like you might expect, it is very loud in that building. It is a production facility. And while I was able to filter out a lot of the background noise in the audio, there's a reason it sounds like we're shouting at each other.
So we start by bringing in oil from the rail car or semi truck. We bring that into our process. We hold it in, we have 12 tanks to hold our feedstock, we call that, as it comes in the process.
Cool. And it's just soybean oil coming in.
Yes.
Okay, it's already been crushed and separated out.
And it's we buy degummed soybean oil, so it's not refined, bleached, and deodorized like some facilities use. We actually do a refining process here in the centrifuge. We don't bleach it or deodorize it. However, we bring it in here and we run it through a centrifuge, which separates phospholipids and phosphorus, magnesium, metals as we call them. We try and pull out of the oil before we process it. So it's made difficult to see, but our large tanks here, the tan ones, we have 12 of those, and that's where we hold all our feedstock. The one's in the far back there. But once we bring the oil through the dryer, dry it, remove the moisture out, it goes into this brown tank that's partially insulated here. And then we feed that through a process where we mix sodium methylate and methanol with it, and that creates a reaction. And we put it through a plug flow reactor, they call it, where it goes through several loops to get the chemicals incorporated with the oil. Then once we do all that, we move it over to a second stage where we actually do the same thing. The first is a primary and the second one's more of a polishing stage. So then that goes to one of our holding tanks back here, and then we bring that out, remove the methanol from the oil, and then we wash it. Most people never hear about washing oil.
No, yeah.
You actually mix water and acid and oil together, and that's our wash process. We literally wash the impurities and the chemicals you put in there out of the oil.
So you put the methanol in to trigger a reaction.
Yes.
But then you got to take the methanol out.
Yes.
And then you wash it, get all the impurities out.
Right.
Cool.
Then it dries. You dry it, remove the moisture again that you added in the wash system, and then that's filtered and sent to a finished tank. And these are called Venturi mixers up here. These 4 things on the platform, and that really stirs up and mixes the chemicals together, incorporates them all together. That's where we get our reaction. That's about 180 degrees Fahrenheit at that point. Does our reaction, and like I say, then we send it to a tank before we wash it. And this is one of our wash processes here. The oil and water and acid all get mixed in this tank here. We're a small tank, and then it feeds up into those long horizontal separators, and the water and the oil separate in there.
Oh,
so
smart. Nice.
We pull the water off there what we can, and then the rest of it goes to the dryer to be dried. So, and I can take you over on the other end here, and I'll show you where our finished product is in. They're all sold 30,000 gallon capacity. So.
Whoa. So on any given day, how many of those tanks are, filled up?
Oh, at least half, probably half of them. Monday, they're usually all full. By Friday, we're down to a couple tanks. Depends on how our customer picks up, the volume they pick up and that. So we ship about 250,000 gallons a week out of here. So.
Whoa, that is a lot of fuel.
Yep.
Holy cow.
After this, Keiven also took me to the control room and the lab, and I realized that his initial explanation was really just a high-level summary. There is so much that goes into making biodiesel, especially if you want a certified high-quality product. And again, while Keiven was super chill about this, I was blown away by his endless amounts of knowledge. Also, something I thought was cool is that according to a few analyses over the years, for every unit of fossil fuels you put into making soybean biodiesel, you get around 3 to 5 times more energy in return. So I thought that was great. Now, all this said, one thing to note is that right now, most engine manufacturers don't recommend running on pure 100% biodiesel without modifications. Instead, they suggest running on a biodiesel blend, which is a mix of pure biodiesel and the petroleum stuff. In the US, a common blend is called B20. It's 20% biodiesel, 80% petroleum diesel.
So biodiesel can be used interchangeably with diesel fuel, and it can be used in any diesel vehicle. Biodiesel can be used in blends up to B5, 5% biodiesel, just interchangeably with diesel fuel. So fuel retailers are not required to disclose if it's B5 or a lower blend. Chances are we're all running around, if we've got a diesel vehicle, on at least a 5% blend today.
Interesting. Okay.
Because it's just a fungible part of the diesel fuel pool. And in blends up to B20, which is kind of the most commonly used blend in the United States right now, no modifications needed whatsoever to a diesel vehicle to use that. Biodiesel and higher blend concentrations can gel a little bit faster in cold weather, but there are some manufacturers that do support all the way up to B100 without modifications in their equipment. And there's also some aftermarket equipment that can be added on to the vehicle, basically a fuel heating system that helps to keep that fuel nice and warm and flowing freely in the coldest times of the year, coldest parts of the country.
Cool.
No problem. So biodiesel on average reduces carbon and other greenhouse gases by over 70%.
Whoa.
Compared to diesel fuel. But also you're just not getting all that black soot out the tailpipe like you would with other fuels. And in that B20 kind of sweet spot blend that we were talking about, you're going to see the same kind of fuel economy, power, performance, torque that you would out of your standard pickup truck running on diesel fuel.
Back in Melbourne, Rob also uses a B20 blend on his farm to power all the big equipment he uses to plant and harvest those hundreds of acres of crops. And like I expected, he gave me a pretty straightforward answer about how that's been going.
I heard you've been running all of your equipment on biodiesel forever.
We've been running it for, I don't know how many years did I tell you? Quite a few years. We run a 20% blend. I haven't had any problems with it. We've upgraded a lot of our equipment in the last 20 years or whatever, and our older equipment, we ran that. We never had any problems with that either. Cool. Just before harvest is done, we order regular number 2 premium diesel, and then we run some through the equipment and then put that in a tank, and then we start the process all over again. One of the reasons I had mentioned that we use the bio is it's from our soybeans, not necessarily ours, but from United States soybeans.
Yeah.
Hopefully most of the time United States soybeans, and we're using our own product, and I believe it's better for the environment. Not that I'm an environmentalist or worried about everything, but I think it's better for our environment to be doing that. And as far as the cost factor goes, I don't mind paying a little bit extra money for the bio because I feel it's a wash with the better fuel consumption. I can't say, some people say you lose power with the bio. I haven't seen it, but we don't work the snot out of our equipment. So, I mean, if I did, maybe I would notice it.
Okay.
And that brings us back to this combine, harvesting soybeans while running on diesel made from soybeans. Ultimately, soybean biodiesel isn't a perfect option, especially when a lot of equipment needs to run on blends, and we do have other uses for soybean oil. So I don't see a future where everything is run on this kind of fuel. But as someone who's driven past hundreds of Michigan soybean fields and who's gotten into some gardening of my own, I wanted to learn more about this industry that's been all around me without me realizing it. And what stands out to me is that this kind of biodiesel is a step in the right direction that we can take right now. Because, there's no one solution to the climate crisis or to any of the pollution issues we're facing. But I like to remember that every step toward a healthier future, it matters. What I didn't expect was that apparently that can involve making diesel from the same plant that makes my tofu stir fry. Thanks to the Michigan Soybean Committee for sponsoring this video and giving me the chance to learn about this. To give you some context on who they are, the Michigan Soybean Committee is a farmer-led organization. When farmers sell their soybeans, a portion of that money goes to what's called the soybean checkoff. The Michigan Soybean Committee then invests those checkoff dollars in market development, production research, and outreach and education, which is how I got here. One of their goals is to grow opportunities for Michigan soybean farmers, which includes advancing biodiesel. So if you want to learn more about biodiesel and how to help these farmers on their quest for a more sustainable future, you can do that at michigansoybean.org. Thanks as always for being here. I hope you learned something that makes you think about the world just a little differently, and I'll see you soon.